Thing number one, Gary, inflation roars.
All right. So last week we got two big inflation metrics. The big one is the CPI, that stands for the Consumer Price Index. That's the index that people typically talk about when they refer to inflation. It's also horribly manipulated. Anyway, this report showed an overall increase of 2.7% for the last year and 0.3% for the month. Here's the problem with that. The problem is that 0.3% annualizes to 3.7%. And the regular number went 2.4%, then 2.6, then 2.7. Noticing a trend there? It keeps going up. This happened right after the Fed cut. We told them not to. Now, on the core number, that's the CPI excluding food and energy, that was up 3.3%. The target is 2%. So inflation running more than 50% above the target. That target itself is 2% too high. The Fed's mandate is actually stable prices, which is 0% inflation. So all of this is too high and heading in the wrong direction. The day after, on Thursday, we got the PPI, that stands for Producer Price Index. That measures wholesale pricing, and that was up 3%, up from 2.6% the month before. So again, 2.6 going to 3. It's a problem when you have increasing inflation. The whole disinflation story has been blown up. It was up 0.4% for the month. That annualizes to 4.9%, 2.5 times the target. The core PPI, again, core excludes food and inflation, up 3.5% on an annual basis. This should surprise nobody who's a regular here. Basically, right after the Fed cut rates, they got increases in every single inflation metric, and that seems to get worse every single month.
Yeah, Gary, you nailed it. We've been talking about this consistently. Things continue to go up and compound. My question, Gary, you talk a lot about the Arthur Burns problem, right? So, Chairman Powell and cutting rates leading to rampant inflation. My question is, and I know you don't have a crystal ball, but like, what does this look like, right? We think Fed's going to cut rates again. I mean, are we talking about the gas lines of the 70s, or what does this look like for the average American moving forward?
So it's a great question, Rob. And the big the big image from the 1970s inflation is exactly what you were talking about. Huge gas lines. And for a while, they had these rules in place where, if your license plate ended in an even number, you could go, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If your license plate ended in an odd number, it's Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or reversed. And they'd have these long lines. Now, that I think won't happen again this time. And the reason is because in the 1970s, we were really getting our energy from the Middle East. Now we have a situation where the US is the swing producer. It's no longer Saudi Arabia. What our engineers have done with shale and fracking is just remarkable. And so the US is actually an exporter of energy. So I don't think we're going to have gas lines, but what happened in the 1970s was, sorry, the 1960s even, was we had an inflation problem. Inflation started to come down. And then President Lyndon Johnson pressured then Fed Chairman Arthur Burns to lower rates. Every president wants low rates to have a good economy, have a hot economy. That's what he did, and inflation came roaring back. And that is one of the reasons why, people think about the inflation in the late 1970s, but if you look at it, the US had elevated inflation for about 15 years. Now, what should scare people is we're about 3 years in, and Andrew and I worked on this incredible graph together. And I'll admit, we're not the only people to notice this. The people at Kobayashi Report have done similar graphs. But if you take a look at the CPI from March of 1966 through December of 1982 and overlay it over the inflation that we've had in the US from September of 2013 through now, boy, are those graphs similar, and the Fed is cutting at exactly the wrong point. We have the Fed meeting later this week. The whole market expects that they're going to cut 25 basis points. Unfortunately, I agree. That is the most likely outcome, and it would be the wrong decision.
We'll keep you in tune with that rate cut coming up, or potential rate cut coming up later this week, and what the Fed decides to do.